World War II. Definition: World War II was fought between the so-called Allies on one side and the Axis on the other, between 1939 and 1945. Causes. The main causes were the Treaty of Versailles, the weakness of the League of Nations, German and Japanese aggression, and the policy of appeasement adopted by some countries towards Germany. The Treaty of Versailles. France and Britain believed that Germany should be made to pay for the losses they suffered during World War I and insisted on very high reparation payments. Hitler was able to use this to stir up feelings of victimization within Germany in the 1930s, especially during the Great Depression of that time. The weakness of the League of Nations. This league was set up after World War I to ensure that there would be no recurrence of wars. The member countries were meant to act together to stop aggression by any country towards another. But when Japan and Italy invaded Manchuria and Abyssinia, respectively in 1931 and 1935, the League did no more than condemn these countries. German and Japanese aggression. Germany wanted to unite with German-speaking Austria, the policy of Anschluss, and also take more land to have more space, Lebensraum. So they invaded Austria and Poland at the start of the war. Japan wanted more land for food and minerals, so they invaded mainland Asia, while the countries that controlled them, Britain and France, were involved in the war. Appeasement. When Hitler sent his army into the Rhineland, an area forbidden to the army by the Treaty of Versailles, the British and French believed that if they allowed that, they could avoid a war. However, Germany saw it as a sign of weakness, and it made Germany more determined to push ahead with their plans for Anschluss and Lebensraum. The participants. Who was involved in the war? World War II was fought between the so-called Allies of Britain, France, Poland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, and later in 1941 the Soviet Union, the USA and China on one side, and the Axis powers of Germany, Italy and later in 1941 Japan on the other. Some major Nazi personalities. Adolf Hitler, 1889 to 1945. Hitler was Austrian and joined the German army in World War I and earned medals for bravery as a message runner for the officers. He was injured in a gas attack at the Battle of Ypres and was in hospital when Germany surrendered in 1918. He became leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 1920, the Nazis, and led an unsuccessful attempt to take over the government in 1923 in Munich and spent time in jail for that. While in jail, he dictated his ideas for Germany to his friend Rudolf Hess, and these were then made into the book Mein Kampf, My Struggle. The Nazis won the general election in 1932, and in 1933 Hitler got the Reichstag, the parliament, to allow him to make laws without consultation. He then banned all other political parties, and with the help of the SA, also called the Brown Shirts, and the SS, the Black Shirts, set about either killing or jailing his opponents from other political parties. In the Night of the Long Knives, the SS eliminated the leadership of the SA, who were then headed by Hitler's rival within the party, Röhm. During the war, Hitler insisted on being involved in the major military decisions, and when it was definite that they had lost and that the Russian Red Army had taken control of the city, Hitler killed himself and his girlfriend Eva Braun in the bunker beneath his Berlin headquarters on April the 30th, 1945. Joseph Goebbels, 1897 to 1945. Goebbels was Minister for National Enlightenment and Propaganda and was responsible for the censorship of the press and radio and of ensuring that all that was done by Hitler and the Nazi Party was glorified. He also committed suicide in the bunker in Berlin along with his wife, having already poisoned their 6 children. Heinrich Himmler, 1900 to 1945. Himmler was leader of Hitler's SS, who took over from the SA as the enforcers for the Nazi Party. On Hitler's orders, he was responsible for the Nazis' final solution, the killing of 6 million Jews in occupied Europe. After his arrest by the British in 1945, Himmler took a cyanide tablet and committed suicide. Rudolf Hess, 1894 to 1987. Hess was involved with Hitler in producing Mein Kampf, and he became Hitler's personal secretary and deputy leader of the Nazi Party. In 1941, without Hitler's knowledge, he flew to Scotland in an attempt to get the British to agree to peace with Germany. He was arrested and after the war was sentenced to life imprisonment. He died in Spandau prison in Berlin in 1987, having been the only prisoner there since 1966. Adolf Eichmann, 1906 to 1962, was an SS officer who attended the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where the so-called final solution of the European Jewish question was decided. And he was in charge of organising the roundup of Jews in Europe and their transfer to work camps and concentration camps. He escaped Germany after the war under a false name and went to Argentina. The Israeli secret police, the Mossad, captured him and he was tried and executed in 1962. Hermann Göring, 1893 to 1946. Göring was a World War I hero and was appointed by Hitler to lead his brown shirts, the SA, in 1923. In the 1930s, he was appointed commander of the Air Force, the Luftwaffe, and he was also centrally involved in the final solution. He was tried for war crimes in Nuremberg and condemned to death, but committed suicide on the eve of his execution. Major military events in World War II. In March 1938, Germany took over Austria. In September 1938, Germany, France and Britain agreed that Germany could take the German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia, and Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, claimed that he had won peace in our time. August 1939, Germany invaded Poland from the west and Russia took the eastern part. World War II had begun. In April 1940, Germany invaded Norway and Denmark, and in May, Germany invaded France and then Belgium, where British and French troops evacuated 300,000 soldiers back to Britain from Dunkirk. August and September 1940, the Battle of Britain was fought in the skies over Britain between the RAF and the Luftwaffe. This ended in stalemate and the Germans changed to bombing British cities that winter in what was known as the Blitz. June 1941. Hitler invaded Soviet Russia using a three-pronged attack on Leningrad, Moscow and Kiev. The combination of the severe Russian winter and the Soviet Union's willingness to throw as many troops as necessary against the Germans led to victory at the Battle of Stalingrad in February 1943. December 1941, Japan bombed the American naval fleet in the Pacific at Pearl Harbor to ensure that they wouldn't be stopped in their invasion of mainland China. This led to American entry into World War II. August 1942 to May 1943. The Battle of El Alamein was won by Montgomery's 8th Army, who defeated Rommel. On D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, Operation Overlord was begun, involving the Allied invasion of occupied France. Despite a setback during the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes Mountains, this led to the successful liberation of France. May 1945, the Soviet Army advanced on Germany from the east, and the British and Americans advanced from the west, so the war ended with Victory in Europe Day on May the 8th. 1945. August 1945. By now the Japanese had lost the war, but they were continuing to fight. The US dropped the atomic bomb on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The complete destruction and death forced them to surrender on August the 15th, and World War II had ended. 1945 to 1949. Nazi leaders were tried in the German town of Nuremberg in a series of 13 trials. Some were executed, and others were sentenced to life in prison. The Holocaust. Hitler was anti-Semitic and from a young age had a hatred of the Jews. Some suggested that he blamed the Jews for his lack of success in school and his failure to get into the Austrian army. Hitler and the Nazi Party used propaganda successfully to get the Germans to believe that Jews were partly responsible for losing World War I and for how badly off they were in the 1930s. Once in power, from 1935, he brought in laws depriving them of citizenship and banned them from government jobs and required them to wear the Star of David. In November 1938, the Nazis organised the so-called Kristallnacht, or Night of Broken Glass, when Jewish businesses and synagogues, that's Jewish churches, were attacked. The treatment in Germany of Jews was so bad that 1/2 of their population had left the country by the time war broke out in 1939. Once the war was in progress and Germany was advancing in most of Europe, the so-called final solution was decided, whereby Europe's Jews were taken from their homes and sent to work camps where they worked until they died from hard work and starvation. Those who didn't die were then shot or sent to death camps that were organised only for the purpose of their extermination. There were over 20 such concentration camps throughout Europe, with 6 of them being used only as extermination camps, such as Auschwitz and Treblinka in Poland. It's estimated that about 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. The results of World War II. Death. There were over 55 million people killed in this war, depending on which source you read. Over 24 million soldiers, 3/4 Allies and 25% Axis, and 31 million civilians, 80% Allies and 20% Axis. These figures don't include the number of people injured. Destruction. Many cities and towns were ruined from bombing and shelling during the war. Afterwards, the USA provided aid through the Marshall Plan for Western European reconstruction. The decline of Europe and the growth of superpowers. European countries like Britain, France and Germany were no longer the big world powers that they had been, but the USA and the USSR became superpowers. The partition of Germany. USSR extended control of Europe. Over the next 10 years, the Soviet Union, or the USSR, took control of much of Eastern Europe, and this caused the so-called Cold War. The emergence of the European Union. Many Western European politicians believed that it was only by becoming closer through trade that Europe could avoid more wars. The European Economic Community began in 1957 with the countries of Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Italy and West Germany organising free trade between themselves. Today the EU has 28 members and is growing.